Well, thank you very much. These are exciting times. I think you probably want to speak about war rather than this, but this is very important. This is very important, and we're doing very well on the war front, to put it mildly, I would say. Somebody said, on a scale of 10, where would you rate it? I said about a 15. And we're going to continue to do well. We have the greatest military in the world by far. And that was a tremendous threat to us for many years. 47 years they've been killing our people and killing people from all over the world. And I think we have great support. And I think if we didn't do it first, they would have done it to Israel and give us a shot if that was possible. And if we didn't terminate the worst deal, one of the worst deals ever made, the Obama
Donald Trump opened his mouth and, before any formality, before any standard introductory remarks, before even thanking the guests in a conventional way, said something that sent a chill through anyone listening carefully. He said things were going very well, and he used the phrase, "on the war front," not as a metaphor, not as a figure of speech to describe trade disputes or domestic political battles. He used the expression literally, concretely, militarily. And he went further. When someone asked him on a scale of 1 to 10 how he was rating the situation, he responded with a calm that bordered on the unsettling, about a 15. 15. On a scale of 10. That response, seemingly simple, carries enormous weight. It tells us that the President of the United States, at that exact moment, while the world's top technology leaders sat across from him waiting to discuss the future of American energy, was also monitoring, or had already concluded, large-scale military operations against Iran. And that, in his assessment, those operations were going beyond anything that could have been expected. There was no press conference. There was no national address. There was no formal speech to the American people. The war was announced, if we can even use that word, between praise for the CEO of Amazon and a joke about the hard-to-pronounce name of an Oracle executive. That juxtaposition is not accidental. It is, in fact, deeply revealing of Donald Trump's communication style and governing philosophy. But we'll get back to that. For now, we need to break down what was said. We need to analyze each piece of that statement as if we were taking apart a clock, with care, with precision, and with the awareness that every gear connects to another. Let's get to the concrete. Let's get to what was actually said, word for word, because in this specific case, every word matters in an extraordinary way. Trump stated that B-2 bombers, the famous stealth bombers, the most advanced and most expensive aircraft in the American military arsenal, those wing-shaped planes that look like they came out of a science fiction film, but are very, very real, attacked and destroyed what he called Iran's nuclear potential. And he did not mince words describing the result. He used one specific word, a definitive word, a word that leaves no room for interpretation: obliteration. Obliteration, not significant damage, not strategic strike, not capability degradation. Obliteration, as if Iran's nuclear program, decades of development, billions of dollars invested, underground facilities built to withstand conventional bombing, as if all of that had simply ceased to exist. And he went further. Trump stated that had those attacks not taken place, Iran would have had a nuclear weapon in its hands within 2 weeks. 2 weeks, not 2 years, not 2 months, 2 weeks. A time frame so specific, so precise, so absolutely definitive that any intelligence analyst anywhere in the world immediately sat up straight. Why is 2 weeks such a problematic claim? Because intelligence about an adversary nation's nuclear capability is not the kind of thing that can be measured with that kind of surgical precision. The best intelligence analysts in the world, with access to satellites, informants, intercepted communications, and decades of specialized monitoring, rarely can say with certainty exactly when a country is X weeks away from having a nuclear weapon. It's a complex calculation, full of variables, full of uncertainties. Trump's claim, 2 weeks period, no margin of error, sounds less like intelligence and more like retroactive justification, like a narrative constructed to explain and legitimize an action that had already been decided. But let's keep listening to what he said, because there's more. Trump talked about Iranian missiles being wiped out rapidly. He talked about launch facilities being destroyed. He talked about Iran attacking its neighbors, including what he called allies or former allies. He painted a picture of a collapsing regime, a disintegrating leadership, a country that was out of control and that, in his words, would have used it on us if we had waited any longer. That last sentence deserves special attention. Would have used it on us if we had waited any longer. That is the language of the preemptive war doctrine. That is the same logic that was used to justify the invasion of Iraq in 2003. The existence of an imminent, grave, existential threat that would justify military action before it was too late. And we all know how that story ended. This does not necessarily mean Trump was lying. It is possible that American intelligence genuinely indicated Iran was dangerously close to completing its nuclear program. It is possible that the B-2 strikes were truly as devastating as he described. It's possible. But the way that information was communicated, in passing, without documentation, without context, in the middle of a meeting about electricity bills, makes it impossible to seriously evaluate the truthfulness of those claims without additional information. One of the most striking features of Trump's communication style is his ability to construct historical narratives that connect past decisions to present outcomes, always with himself as the central and indispensable protagonist. In this speech, that skill is on full display. The story Trump tells begins 47 years ago. He says with conviction that for 47 years Iran has been killing Americans and killing people around the world. 47 years of impunity. 47 years of threat. And then he arrives, first in his previous term, now again, and starts to turn that around. The first chapter of this narrative is the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the powerful Iranian general who commanded the Quds Force, the external operations unit of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Trump mentioned Soleimani, with his name badly distorted by the automatic transcription, appearing as Solomi and Soleimania, as a turning point. In his view, eliminating Soleimani was one of the biggest factors that led to the current situation. A piece removed from the chessboard, and the entire board began to change. The second chapter is the withdrawal from Obama's nuclear deal, the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which Trump calls one of the worst deals ever made and describes in a completely inaccurate way as something that gave Iran a nuclear weapon. That is factually incorrect. The JCPOA was precisely the opposite. It was an agreement that limited Iranian uranium enrichment in exchange for sanctions relief. There were legitimate criticisms of the deal. Experts debated its duration, its verification mechanisms, the concessions made. But saying it gave Iran a nuclear weapon is a complete inversion of what the document proposed. However, it is important to understand what Trump is doing here. He is not necessarily trying to offer a technical analysis of the JCPOA. He is building a political narrative, and in that narrative, Obama is the villain who opened the door, and Trump is the hero who closed it. The factual inaccuracy serves a specific rhetorical purpose, to simplify a complex issue into terms of good and evil, mistakes and corrections, weakness and strength. The third chapter is the American military buildup during Trump's first term. He cites this as one of the most important factors that made the current strikes possible. The biggest factor was the rebuilding of the military in my first term, he says. And then we arrive at the present, the B-2 bombers, the obliteration, the 15 on a scale of 10. It is an internally coherent narrative. Every piece fits with the next. Every decision leads to the following one. And at the center of everything, invariably, stands Donald Trump as the only one who saw what needed to be done and had the courage to do it. There is a passage in the speech that went relatively unnoticed amid all the other explosive statements, but one that deserves close attention. Trump said, casually, that the Iranian leadership was rapidly disappearing, that every person who tried to assume a leadership position in the regime ended up dead. Consider the diplomatic weight of that statement. The President of the United States, in public, in a live-streamed meeting, essentially describing a systematic pattern of elimination of the leadership of a sovereign state, not as something he is condemning, not as something he is investigating, as something he is observing, with implicit satisfaction, and reporting as a positive result of the ongoing operations. In any other historical context, that statement would have generated days of analysis, congressional inquiries, diplomatic reactions from allies and adversaries. It would have been the center of all news coverage. But on that day, in that context, it was said in passing, almost as a sidebar, before Trump moved on to talk about the large data centers being built across the United States. That is, in a certain way, brilliant from a communication standpoint, even if it is deeply troubling from the standpoint of international diplomatic norms. The statement was made. It is on the record. But the context in which it was delivered made it far more difficult for any international actor to respond formally. Because how do you formally respond to something that was said between a joke and a compliment to a tech executive? Trump cited the number 47 very specifically. 47 years of Iranian hostility against the United States and the world. That number is not random. It refers directly to the Iranian Revolution of 1979 and the hostage crisis that followed, when 52 American diplomats and citizens were held captive for 444 days. Since then, the relationship between the United States and Iran has been one of the most complicated, most charged, and most dangerous in global geopolitics. Proxy wars in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. Terrorist attacks, assassinations, intelligence operations, economic sanctions, agreements, broken agreements. A decades-long dance between two powers that never came to face each other directly on an open battlefield, but never stopped sizing each other up, threatening each other, and weakening each other through indirect means. Trump is saying that it is over, that the 47 years have come to an end, that under his leadership the problem has been resolved definitively. That is a historical claim of extraordinary proportions, and one that only time and facts will be able to confirm or refute. What we know for certain, based on Trump's own speech, is that large-scale American military operations were conducted against Iranian facilities, including what he describes as the country's nuclear program. What we do not know, and what Trump certainly did not give us the means to evaluate based on the information provided, is the actual extent of the damage, Iran's ongoing response, the implications for regional allies, the impact on oil prices and market stability, and the long-term consequences for the geopolitical order of the Middle East. During the speech, Trump makes a claim that deserves to be highlighted separately. He said that if the United States had not acted first, Iran would have attacked Israel, and that if Israel were attacked, there would be an attempt to strike the United States itself. That is the logic of chain security. The idea that defending strategic allies is inseparable from defending America's own interests. It is a logic with a long tradition in American foreign policy, especially regarding Israel. But it is also a logic that, when used to justify unilateral preemptive military action, raises serious questions from the standpoint of international law and the norms of state sovereignty. We are not here to judge American foreign policy. That is not the role of a commentator. But we are here to clearly identify what is being said and what the statements imply. And what Trump is implying is that the United States decided, unilaterally, that the Iranian threat was sufficiently serious to justify a large-scale military action without, at least in the public narrative presented, going through formal congressional consultations, without seeking a resolution from the UN Security Council, without building an international coalition. That may have been the right decision. It may have been the wrong decision. But the fact that it was a decision made in this manner and announced in this way, in the middle of a meeting about electricity bills and artificial intelligence, is something that democracies around the world, allies and non-allies of the United States alike, will have to process very carefully. Let's talk about something that may be the most fascinating and most troubling aspect of everything that happened at that event. Not the content of what was said, but the form, the style, what the manner of communication tells us about the man and his vision of how power should be exercised and displayed. Trump announced, if we can even use that word, large-scale military strikes against a sovereign state while sitting next to the CEOs of some of the world's largest companies, discussing energy deals and artificial intelligence. He did this without interrupting the event, without asking the cameras to be turned off, without asking the guests to wait while he made a separate statement. He simply said, as part of the event's opening remarks, that things were going well on the war front, and moved on. After that, he joked about the hard-to-pronounce name of the Oracle executive. He praised Speaker Mike Johnson's work. He told a story about natural gas plants in Louisiana. He talked about the pipes inside an industrial facility that reminded him of Empire State Buildings laid on their side. He joked about the youthfulness of OpenAI's COO. He said coal is clean and beautiful. And woven throughout all of that, inserted as if they were equally casual remarks, were statements about the destruction of a country's nuclear program, the elimination of its leadership, and ongoing military operations. That capacity, or that choice, to treat matters of incomparable historical gravity with the same casual tone one uses to discuss logistical details of a business deal is a defining characteristic of Trump's communication style, and it produces two simultaneous and opposite effects on the audience. For his supporters, that style projects absolute confidence. It transmits the image of a leader so in control of the situation, so above the circumstances, so certain of the outcome, that he can literally mention a war between a compliment and a joke without his composure being shaken at all. It is the image of the commander who does not blink, does not flinch, does not show weakness. It is powerful. It is effective. It is exactly what a large portion of his electorate wants to see. For his critics, that same style is troubling for exactly the same reasons. The gravity of a military action, any military action, but especially one against a country with nuclear ambitions, in one of the most geopolitically explosive contexts on the planet, demands seriousness, demands transparency, demands the kind of formal communication that democracies have built over centuries precisely to ensure that life and death decisions are not made and announced in a unilateral and informal manner. Both groups have valid reasons to feel what they feel. That is the dilemma Trump always places before the honest observer. It is important to pause here and acknowledge a relevant methodological limitation. This analysis is based on an automatic transcript of a YouTube video, with all the problems that entails. Names were distorted. Technical terms were turned into nonsense words. The FERC, the Powerful American Energy Regulatory Agency, appears consistently as FK throughout the entire transcript. Proper nouns were completely mangled. But there is something that the transcript captures with sufficient accuracy. The tone, the cadence, the rhythm, the way Trump moves from one subject to the next, the manner in which he weaves together the serious and the casual, the historic and the trivial, a war and the pipes inside a gas plant. That does not get lost in an automatic transcript, and it is precisely that which makes the analysis possible and relevant, even with the technical inaccuracies in the text. What the transcript does not capture, and what would be essential for a complete analysis, are the reactions of those present. How did the CEOs of the world's largest technology companies react when Trump opened the event by talking about war? Was there silence? Were there exchanged glances? Was there any sign of discomfort, surprise, or concern? Those reactions, which certainly existed in some form, are beyond the reach of the transcript and deserve attention from anyone who had access to the full video. Before getting into the Iran topic in more detail, Trump made a quick but loaded mention of Venezuela. He said the Venezuela situation worked out really great, that there is now a wonderful relationship with the president and the country's representatives, and that the United States is taking out hundreds of millions of barrels of oil from that relationship to the mutual benefit of Americans and Venezuelans. That statement is remarkable for several reasons. First, because it represents a dramatic shift from the American discourse on Venezuela in recent years, a country whose opposition Washington had at one point recognized as the legitimate government, and on which it had imposed severe sanctions. Second, because the claim that the U.S. is taking out hundreds of millions of barrels of oil from the country sounds less like a partnership and more like a resource extraction deal in exchange for some kind of political accommodation. Third, and most relevant to this analysis, because that mention places Venezuela and Iran in the same rhetorical paragraph. Two countries that, until recently, represented major headaches for American foreign policy. And Trump presents both as solved, one through the diplomatic and economic route, the other through the military route. It is a narrative of efficiency, of results, of a president who acts where others merely talk. Any honest analysis of a political speech must include not only what was said, but what was left unsaid. The questions that were never asked, the information that was never provided, the contexts that were deliberately omitted. First question: what is the domestic legal basis for the strikes? The American Constitution is clear. It is Congress that declares war. Over the decades, presidents of both parties have been expanding executive authority in military matters, but a large-scale attack against a sovereign state using B-2 bombers would be, by any reasonable interpretation, an action that would require at least congressional consultation. Trump mentioned none of that. Second question: what was Iran's immediate response? If the strikes were as devastating as Trump described, what did the Iranian regime say and do in the hours that followed? Was there retaliation? Were there threats? Was there military mobilization? The speech gives no clue about any of this. Third question: how were U.S. allies informed? Israel, Saudi Arabia, the European countries with troops in the Middle East, all of these actors have direct interests in any large-scale military operation against Iran. Were they consulted? Were they informed? Did they offer support? Trump made no mention of allies at any point. Fourth question: what is the exit strategy? That is always the most important question in any military operation. If the objective was to destroy Iran's nuclear program, what comes next? Will the Iranian regime capitulate? Will it rebuild? Will it retaliate through other means? Cyber attacks, proxy actions in the Middle East, closing the Strait of Hormuz. Trump offered no outline of any long-term strategy. Fifth question: what does obliteration actually mean in practice? Iranian nuclear facilities are built with deliberate redundancy, some buried dozens of meters underground. B-2 bombs can cause enormous damage, but the history of modern air warfare teaches us that rarely does a single bombing campaign completely destroy the industrial and scientific capability of a state. What was actually destroyed? What remained? None of those questions were answered, and in a democracy that values transparency and civilian control of the armed forces, that absence of answers is not a minor detail. To understand the gravity of Trump's claims, some context is necessary about what the Iranian nuclear program is or was, and why it has generated so much concern over the decades.